What is up, everybody? Welcome to episode 9 of the All About How podcast here on growingau.com. I'm your host, John Knott. You can find me on Instagram at johnknottau. You can also follow the podcast and growingau.com on Instagram at growingau. Thanks for tuning in today, guys. This, as I said, is the 9th episode of the 365-day podcasting experiment, where we are posting a podcast every single day for a year to answer the question, does more content equal more followers? So I'm really excited to see how the rest of this kind of year turns out for us, but it's crazy to think that today is the final day that we are going to be a single-digit podcast. After today, it'll be double digits, triple digits, quadruple digits far in the future. Today is the last day of that. It's really crazy to think about. It's kind of sad. So I figured we are going to have a very, very different type episode today. It's going to be longer. This is definitely not your short little 5-10 minute episode. This is going to be a longer episode today. I am warning you now. So let's go ahead and roll the intro, and I'm going to tell you what we're talking about. It's going to be good.
It's all about how in 2020 we're going to leave the world a better place than we found it.
So as I said, this is going to be a slightly longer podcast today because this is going to be our first ever book review on the All About How podcast. I'm super excited for it. We are breaking down Ray Dalio's Principles today. This is a book I read about a month and a half ago. I wanted to give it some time to sink in, to seep in, and I got to come back to my notes today, look over everything, get all of it put together for us so we can actually have a good review of this book and the success practices, tips, strategies, so on and so forth that it is including inside. So really look forward to this podcast today. Again, this is not going to be a short review of this book. If you're looking for a quick 5 to 10 minute, should I read it or not? There are plenty of reviews like that on YouTube. I highly suggest you go check them out. They're very good, but this is going to be slightly longer today. We're actually going to take the time to delve into the different strategies and suggestions that the book does give us. And we want to talk about them a little bit here today, talk about how they relate to each other, talk about how they relate to life, give some examples, things like that. So that's what we're doing today. If that's not your thing, no problem. Drop us a like, give us a share, and I'll catch you tomorrow on day 10. Can't believe we're already there. So without further ado, if you're still here, we're going to go ahead and jump into the episode. This is the deep dive with Ray Dalio's Principles. So I want to give really quickly, I want to talk about the structure of the book. The book is broken down into 3 different sections. Biography, this is basically where Ray Dalio is talking about his life, his life's work, where he's coming from, just to try and give the reader an idea as to who they are listening to and kind of give credibility to him. Now, I already knew who Ray Dalio was before reading this book, so that was a section I skimmed through at best, just to try and really get onto the value that was contained into the 2 latter sections, which are life and work, and the principles for each. Now, in today's deep dive, we are only going to be reviewing the life section of the book. And before you start freaking out, let me explain. The principles that are stated in the life section of Ray Dalio's book are all the same principles that are used within the work section of Ray Dalio's book. The difference is in the work section, the third and last section, Ray Dalio is taking those principles from the life portion and applying them to the workplace environment. He even states in the book that life should be read in its entirety, whereas work should be simply used as kind of a reference guide when needed and kind of acted as if it was a dictionary. You need to look something up, you go into this book, you look up your problem, and it will have your solution. And that's how work is supposed to be approached. There's a nice index breakdown of both sections, so it's very simple and easy to find your way through them. I really like it, but we're going to be reviewing the principles in the life section, understanding that then the work section is kind of a read as needed, where they're going to take those life principles and apply them to specific work scenarios. So I do highly recommend that you do get the book simply to go over and look in that work section to see what applies to you. And I will say right now, this book, hands down, is a must read for highly successful people, in my personal opinion. I think it is going to be up there with books like How to Win Friends and Influence People, books like The 4-Hour Work Week, and much, much more. So this is, I think, definitely one of those books. So I'm going to say get it to read that work section, but understand that the main core principles discussed in this book are all going to be talked about in the podcast today because they are all contained within the life section. Let's just jump into it here and stop rambling. Chapter 1. The first thing I have written down from chapter 1 is probably the theme that continues throughout the entire book. And this is just reoccurring, very evident that this is the base from which everything else is built upon. And that's principle 1, be radically open-minded and radically transparent. I want to talk about that a little bit. And I want to talk about how being radically open-minded and radically transparent relate to each other. It's going to be very hard, if not impossible, to be radically open-minded if you are not also radically transparent. If we think about that, how can you be radically open-minded to somebody if you're not also radically transparent in sharing your viewpoints and sharing your disagreements, your agreements, so on and so forth with that person? Because honestly, if you are radically open-minded, you're not going to have an issue with sharing the way you feel, because what the radically open-minded mindset is going to allow you to do is pursue the truth. And that's something we're going to talk more about throughout these principles, is the importance of truth compared to belief, and being truthful compared to being right. And there's a big difference. So we're going to be looking at that a little bit, but we have to understand that being radically open-minded and being radically transparent is the kind of, if you take one thing away from this book, that is what we're taking away from it, is being radically open-minded, being radically transparent. Every other tip, every other success strategy subsequent to that is based deeply in that mindset. And if we're not able to achieve that, most of what is contained hereafter is not going to be very useful. And if we're going to take one thing away, that is definitely what we want to take away, being radically open-minded and radically transparent. The other nice part about that, and as I said, we're really diving into these tips here, is that is something that is going to be very easy to practice on a daily basis. We're going to have moments in life where we're going to be on just our regular work, maybe at school, whatever it might be, where it's going to be moments where you need to be radically open-minded because you're having different opinions. You're having different things thrown at you all at once, maybe from a boss, teacher, friend, lover, so on and so forth. And being radically open-minded to hear them, to hear what they're saying, to process what they're saying. And we're going to be talking about processing later on as well, to hear all of that. And then also being able to be radically transparent and telling that person, I agree with you, I disagree with you, here's why, and let's reach this argument. That is basically what this whole book is about, is how to start with being radically open-minded, being radically transparent, and how to live by that principle to operate in a daily life. The other thing I want to say is the being radically transparent part is equally as important, as we said, to being radically open-minded. You have to be radically open-minded all the time, but you also have to be willing to be radically transparent all the time. So what that means is, no matter who it is, being radically open-minded is easy because that's something that we can do in our own minds. It's not something that necessarily requires an immediate attention behavior, where it doesn't require us to do something that's going to immediately essentially could elicit a negative response from the other person if we're just listening and processing the information. But the radical transparency part is equally as important, even though that may elicit negative and not so positive response from the other person, because if we're disagreeing with them and they are not someone who understands the subsequent principles in this book, they may react harshly. But we're going to talk about how to deal with that throughout the course of this book. It really does lay out the groundwork for using this tip successfully, this being radically open-minded and radically transparent. But both are equally important. We have to practice them both equally without bias. And every single time we have the ability to apply this, it is important that we take the second longer to respond, to be able to think consciously about, okay, I want to be radically open-minded, I want to be radically transparent, and then act upon whatever essentially the stimulus is that is being given to you in that moment. So this is such an important tip, being radically open-minded, radically transparent. This is, like I said, the one that I remember every single time walking away from this book. This is the thing that stuck out with me the most. So later on in chapter 1, what's some other stuff in here? We have embracing the pain and weighing the second and third order consequences. This is really essentially flows right from being radically open-minded and radically transparent. If you're being radically open-minded and radically transparent and you're embracing pain, if you're embracing, I don't like hearing this, I don't like the way this feels, I don't like what you just said to me, being radically open-minded about that, and you embrace the pain, so it gives you a couple different options there. Number one, you have to think about, okay, I'm embracing the pain. Am I embracing it and I'm thinking about it? Okay, so are they causing me pain because what they're saying is false and I need to address that? Or does it cause me pain because what they're saying is true and I need to address myself? So that's really important there. Weighing second and third order consequences, that is just so important. That comes down to like making a decision but not necessarily paying attention to what comes after that decision. He says that's what differentiates some of the best decision makers of all time, is weighing the second and third order consequences. I'm going to give a quick, easy example of this one. This is simply, okay, you want to maybe get fit, or maybe you don't even necessarily care about getting super fit, but you're debating whether or not to go to the gym. So the first order consequence is very simple. You either go to the gym or you don't. That's the first order consequence. That's all that's going to be affected by that decision. You either go or you don't. The second, third order consequences could be, okay, so you don't go to the gym tonight. Maybe that makes it easier for you not to go tomorrow, which makes it easier for you not to go the next day. Give that rinse, wash, repeat over a 3, 4, 5 month period of time. Then you start to get to your third order consequences. You start putting on weight. You start getting sloppy. You start getting less motivated. You start to get less promotions at work. You start to do less work well. Maybe at that point, your spouse starts to disrespect you because you start to put on some pounds, and that's not the person they married. You know what I'm talking about there. So that starts to happen. Next thing you know, maybe work's really not going well because the mental weakness that you're building, that I don't want to go to the gym because I just don't want to, that laziness is going to start to permeate out into other areas of your life because you're allowing it to fester over time. Okay, so now it's permeating into your work, it's permeated into your relationship. Maybe at this point you're on the brink of losing your job, maybe you lose your lover, and next thing you know you're with no job and no person and no lover, which is, and I'm just gonna say here, like, that is what I'm assuming a lot of us are not shooting to be, and that's what we're trying to improve from falling from that point. And really, I think that's what it comes down to, of this one decision that we're going to make. It might seem really easy in the moment, but if once we take a second, and it may only take 30 seconds to do, to weigh that second and that third order consequence, I think it becomes very easy to see how important decision making really does become, and how applying that radical open-mindedness to say and think to yourself, I need to be radically open-minded with myself, and to think to myself, okay, if I don't go to the gym, I'm probably going to get overweight, I'm going to get lazy, and then the things that I want to achieve are less likely to happen. And I have to be radically open-minded with myself to know that, okay, I'm being weak right now, I need to stop doing that. So weighing those second and third order consequences in any aspect, so highly important. So next up, we have evolving is the greatest accomplishment and reward. This relating to, and we talked about it a lot here on the podcast before, evolving the whole person. And that's what comes really important here. It's not just improving one area of life by giving up on the other. It's about improving the entire person, evolving everything about it. That also then relates, like, look at something like osteopathic medicine. Osteopathic medicine obviously focuses on the problem, but it's equally as focused on healing the person as well as solving the problem. So I think when we look at this evolution, it talks about this essentially taking our entire being, our entire self to the next level. It's at the core of personal development. It's at the core of self-help. It's at the core of recovery. Personal evolution, complete encompassing evolution is so important, and it is really the greatest accomplishment and reward. If you can elevate yourself completely to a whole new level of existence and life and standard, then you have, in my opinion, become highly successful in this whole personal development life game that we're all living on a daily basis. We're all striving to get better. And so evolving the whole person, taking that osteopathic approach to evolution, so important, which obviously that comes down to two things. We want to embrace the entire person, not just the issue. So that also then comes down to being able to embrace pain, also, as well as then relating back to being radically open-minded. We want to be able to evolve ourselves, and that comes down to being able to address our own issues, address our own weaknesses, address our own kind of soft spots, as well as our strengths and the things that we're doing really well at the same time. So evolving is the greatest accomplishment and reward. Be objective about everything. Embrace the struggle. And that's what I think what is being talked about there, embracing struggle while also being completely open-minded to everything. So that kind of does it for chapter 1. Let's jump on here into chapter 2. And in chapter 2, Ray Dalio gives us a 5-step process to success. I love 5-step processes. They're always the best. So the 5-step process. Process number 1, step 1, have a very clear goal. This is talked about in so many books. The Alchemist is a big one. You have to be able to address the universe, tell the universe what you want. I've always referred to it as walking up to the counter of life, and life is going to ask you what your order is, and you're going to have to tell life exactly what it is you want, and that's what life is going to give you the opportunity to go get. So we have to have very, very clear goals. We have to know what it is we want to achieve. We have to identify and don't tolerate the problems that stand in the way of our goal. That's, again, embracing the pain. Don't just reject the pain. Don't run from the pain. Don't say the pain doesn't matter, I'm just going to, power through it. Nothing like that. We have to embrace the pain. Identify and don't tolerate the problem. And the only way we do that is by saying, pain, I am one with you. I'm going to pull you in, and we're going to push on through this, okay? So then step 3, we're going to diagnose the problem and the root cause. So that's also, being radically open-minded as well. because again, we have to not only diagnose the problem, but we have to diagnose the root cause to that problem. So maybe, as we said before, okay, why can I not do 20 push-ups? Okay, so the problem is I can't do 20 push-ups. Okay, so I'm not strong enough. But what's the root cause of that problem? Maybe it's because I'm living a very sedentary lifestyle, I'm not eating a proper diet, and I'm not doing the things that are necessary to maintain a healthy being. So that's identifying the root problem. Being radically open-minded there is so important because, again, you have to be able to look at yourself and say, this is what I'm doing wrong. So that's really important there. Okay, so next thing we got to do is we got to design a plan to solve the problem. So not only are we going to set clear goals, but we also have to make it very clear the plan that we are going to pursue to achieve those goals. I think that really just kind of relates back. And this is also where, when we're designing that plan, we can relate back to last chapter on those second and third order consequences. When we take time to weigh the second and third order consequences of our decisions and ultimately the steps of our plan, it allows us to plan better, be prepared for more, which honestly, the more prepared we are, the better off we're going to be. And if we're going to have a clear goal, it makes sense to have a clear plan. The only way you're going to have a clear plan is by identifying all the which ways and hows that things can go wrong in the plan. Also, we have to be able to differentiate the symptoms from the disease. This kind of goes back to osteopathic medicine as well, but also this goes back to step number 3 is diagnosing problems in the root cause. So the root cause, we have to not just sit around and solve the symptoms, we have to get to the root cause and solve the disease. If you ever watch Dr. House, that's the whole point of that show, right? So we got to solve the disease here. And as we said before, okay, the problem is that you can't do pull-ups. That's like a symptom. You can't do pull-ups. But what's the root cause? What's the disease? Okay, the problem is my lifestyle choices. I need to adjust those. And those are the things that need to be fixed to ultimately solve the root cause, not just the symptom. And we have to be able to differentiate both. Again, as I said before, everything's coming back to that radical open-mindedness and radical transparency. But if it's so easy, if that's all it takes, why isn't everyone elevating and evolving and moving to the next level of life? Well, chapter 3 really starts to talk about some of the biggest barriers that we're going to face on this journey to our personal evolution and success using that 5-step process. And one of the biggest barriers is going to be ego and the blind spot that is subsequently caused by ego. And again, that comes to radical open-mindedness and also weighing the second and third order consequences. If we are radically open-minded, it allows us to step away from that ego. And if we're weighing the second and third order consequences, it allows us to kind of really bring back the negative effects and the width and size of that blind spot. So we have to know that you may not always be right, and we may not always have the best answer. I find this one is super important. And again, I just want to say, I am paraphrasing these here a little bit, but this one's really important. We have to know that you may not be right. That is so important, to know that just because I believe I'm right, I have to know that I may not actually be right, and I may not actually have the best answer. It's really easy to think, to kind of play the hero narrative, to put ourselves at the center of the story, understanding though that just because we are us doesn't mean we have the best answer, doesn't mean we're right. We are no different than the 50,000 people that are living around us. We are no different than the other 7 billion or however many people are now on the planet. We're no different than all of them. So just because we're us does not mean we have the right answer. And I think being radically open-minded enough to understand that, you are well on your way to being highly successful and achieving that evolution. So that personal thought there, you can take it or leave it, but I really do feel strongly about that. And the next tip here is equally as important and plays right off of that last one. It's look for the best answer, not just the best answer that we can come up with. This is huge. Understanding that we may not have all the resources. We may not have all the information we need to formulate the best answer, and understanding that the best answer may not come from within our own brains. We may have to go to external sources. That could be people, that could be books, that could be resources that are beyond just us. Understanding that the best answer may not be something that we have, it may not be something that we are capable of coming up with, and being radically open-minded enough to understand that we may not be able to do that is so invaluable. Because think about it, if you are open-minded enough to know that you may not have the best answer, then you can then go and find the best answer, make the best decision that then propels you further along in your evolutionary process, be it either personally or professionally or in your relationships, so on and so forth. So that to me right there is knowing that the best answer may not be the one that we come up with. That is incredible. I think achieving that in itself shows a certain degree of personal evolution, because they play off both each other. I'm going to read them again. You have to know that you may not be right or that you may not have the best answer. We have to look for that best answer, knowing that it may not just be the best answer that we can come up with. I think that's something that is very common to hear. Also, people say that I thought of everything. I've thought of everything, and it just doesn't work anyway. Right, but what about all the ways that you didn't think of? It's so important to think about. I've addressed everything. Yes, you've addressed everything that you can think of, but what about all the ways that you didn't? So, really important there. Also comes down to possibly the importance of having stuff and having systems in place that are much like mastermind groups, where you can sit down and talk to people. I mean, that's 5 more, 6 more, 7 more, however many people are in your group, brains to mull over and possibly create these answers, understanding that the best answer may not come from with you. And removing, as it talked about at the beginning of this chapter, removing the ego enough to say that I may not have the best answer is really inspiring. So I really agree with this chapter quite a bit. Also, this comes down to, we talked about before, the difference between what is true and what is right. And it's the importance of searching for what is true and not just searching for what we believe to be right. Because right and wrong are subjective terms, but truth, especially universal truth, is not subjective. Now, there are different types of truth. Neil deGrasse Tyson goes on to talk about in a different form of media. It was not in the book, but Neil deGrasse Tyson has a great podcast talking about the different types of truth. And he talks about personal truth compared to universal truth and so on and so forth. And personal truth is true to the person. But universal truth has been tried, tested, and proven by many different experiments. It's replicable results, so on and so forth. So understanding that we have to find what is true, not just what we believe to be right, or not just what makes us right, is very important. Again, going back to that, looking for the best answer, understanding that it may not come from ourselves. Then it kind of talks about how we can go about the process of finding these true answers, being radically open-minded, to understand that we may not be or have the best answer, to understand that we may have weaknesses, to get over our blind spots. It talks about going about that process with other people. And the first thing it says is, don't argue, simply explore what's true. So that's when you're having a discussion with somebody, you're having a conversation, you're on opposing sides of the viewpoint, rather than arguing with each other, telling someone why they're wrong, trying to explain why you're right. Simply take a moment to step back and say, instead of doing this, why don't we take a moment to simply just see what is true, not just what proves one of us right and what proves the other person wrong. Again, word choice, very important. Open-minded people are curious about disagreement, to understand, why are we having a disagreement? Are we having a disagreement because we honestly disagree? Are we having a disagreement because we're not simply communicating clearly? Are we having a disagreement simply for the sake of having a disagreement because we both want to be right rather than understanding what is true? All of this stuff, highly, highly important. And the people who are open-minded enough to honestly sit down and think, okay, why am I disagreeing with this person right now? Why are we having this discussion? Why are we having this argument? That takes a level of discipline. So the next thing is, when you're in those moments, you're in those disagreements, you're in those arguments, if it gets to that point, to keep asking questions, not just making statements. I think you can see this a lot. All arguments start with like a question. It starts with like, well, why do you believe that? Or you can't possibly think that's true, so on and so forth. Or like, come on, man, are you serious? Stuff like that. You have those questions. You keep asking questions. And then all of a sudden, when it starts to get really heated, when the defenses start to come up, when the swords start to come out, that's when the questions stop and the statements start to fly. The accusations, the laundry lists, all that stuff just starts to come flying out, and the questions really start to dwindle off. But ultimately, how are you going to really figure out what's true if you're not asking questions? Making statements to show someone why you're right does nothing to pursue and truly figure out what is true. If you're just making statements, then you're not curious about the disagreement, because curiosity would lead to questions, and simply you're not interested in exploring what's true. You're just interested in making me seem right, making you seem wrong, or possibly just making sure that I don't look wrong. Any of those things are not good. You want to be pursuing that truth. And this is hard. Look, I've read this book and I still make this mistake. I'm going to make this mistake for the rest of my life. It's just part of the process. But understanding it, being able to take the conscious second to think about it, so important. Again, this all just comes back down to that radical open-mindedness and radical transparency. I'm going to tell you how I feel. I'm going to tell you why I feel that way, but I'm also going to be radically open-minded to listen to how you feel and respond in a way that is appropriate to the way you feel, because I am willing to listen to you and I'm willing to take in at full value what it is you're saying. All just comes back down to that. And also, it comes down to, and this is the next tip here, understanding others' point of view. This comes down to another Neil deGrasse Tyson thing about you have to know how other people think, which is actually interesting. We're going to get into that very shortly. And then finally, we have to use the pain. Again, we talked about embracing pain in chapter 1. We have to use the pain to move to quiet reflection. So what does that mean? That relates back to, okay, we're having this disagreement with somebody. Maybe they're calling you out. Maybe they're calling out your belief. Maybe you're calling out their belief, and then they're going to come back at you about it, so on and so forth. We have to take the moment, okay, I don't like this. I don't feel good. I don't like the way that conversation made me feel. I'm hurt. I'm offended, whatever it might be. To take that pain, and instead of just responding on it and acting on it, take a minute, go back in self-reflection. Okay, what does that pain tell me? Does that pain tell me I have a weak spot? Does that pain tell me that, wow, maybe what they're saying is true and I'm offended because I know it's true and I'm embarrassed, right? So taking the time to reflect on that pain and think about what does that pain represent? Because let's be honest, that is one of the strongest indicators, one of the strongest emotional indicators that there's something there that needs to be reflected upon and understood. And again, that just comes down to embracing that pain, really solving and looking for the root cause, not just solving the symptoms. Okay, so we talked about understanding other people's point of view, and we talked about how Neil deGrasse Tyson is saying you got to understand how other people think. So that moves us really on to chapter 4 here, which talks a lot about conceptual versus literal people. So what's the big difference? Conceptual people are the idea people. These are the, oh my God, I got an idea. I understand how we're going to do this. The literal people are, okay, let's actually form a plan and figure out how we're actually going to do that idea. Literal people and conceptual people often don't get along super well. Conceptual people often think that literal people are pretty dry, and literal people often think that conceptual people kind of got their heads in the clouds. I can self-diagnose myself on this one. I am a conceptual person. I'm pretty good at making plans, but I'm the kind of person that comes up with the big idea and without much thought of how does that actually get achieved. So that's where I fall. I've been able to diagnose myself on that one, as well as other people I've asked, and they've been able to tell me to clarify that viewpoint. So there's nothing wrong with either. Both are essential to the ability of a team, because the conceptual people are going to allow you to move into the future, give kind of have the insight to say we need to go here, whereas the literal people are going to say, okay, but here's how we actually are going to get there. The conceptual people are going to, if we're going to apply it to a different setting, they're going to be able to see the mountain with the most resources that is going to be the most prosperous for your community. And the literal people are going to actually figure out how to move the community from the place where you are now to that mountain. If that kind of makes sense, it's the way I like to think about it. They're both so important. So we have to understand that, and this book is deeply, if you haven't you kind of figured it out already, this book is deeply rooted in neurological science and understanding the brain and psychology and understanding how it works. And that's what's really interesting, is that it's very science-based, this book. And when we look at it, it talks about how the conscious mind is going to battle the subconscious mind, and that the subconscious mind can give us great ideas, but we have to reflect on those ideas. And I have in my notes here that are in front of me, shower, right? A lot of great ideas come to you in the shower, like, oh, wait, that's kind of random, but that's kind of smart. That's your subconscious mind talking to you. And what you have to do then is take those ideas from the subconscious mind and review them with the conscious mind before reacting to them. You might be thinking, okay, well, I don't really get that big of ideas in the shower, so it doesn't apply to me. Yes, it does. It really does apply to you, because every time that you get flustered, every time that you get mad, every time that you get emotionally embarrassed, those are all things that are coming from the subconscious mind, specifically the amygdala. It's all coming from there. The amygdala is kind of the root seat of that emotion. It's the anger, it's that flustered feeling. It's all coming from that amygdala, that subconscious mind. It's all coming up through and off, and that's when people start to get shut off. They start to get red in the face. They start to get angry. They start to tense up, right? And they start to respond as such. But when those emotions come up, we're not going to feel them any less, but we can actually take a second to realize this is my subconscious mind trying to take over right now. It goes back to that really primal fight or flight response, right? That's all it is. It's just real basic genetic makeup. It's how we're wired, right? But we can take a second to think, okay, this is a subconscious primal response that I'm feeling right now, the anger I'm feeling because I don't like the way you're talking to me, or the confusion because I don't understand this topic, or the fear and the embarrassment because I don't want to look dumb, I don't want to look wrong. Understanding that all of that we're feeling as a fight or flight emotion. Now we can take the time to reflect on that pain. See, everything's coming back. Be open-minded about it, reflect on it, and actually then decide on how it is we are going to respond, and not just allowing the subconscious mind to take over. These subconscious mind takeovers are what happens when Jimmy gets mad at the basketball court and takes his ball and stomps on home. Those are those subconscious mind takeovers. So you can apply that philosophy to anything in the grown-up life, in the workplace and stuff like that. It happens all the time. And you can't blame people for it happening, though, because if you don't understand the difference between the subconscious and the conscious mind and the constant battle that is between them, then understanding how to respond and to control the one over the other becomes almost impossible. It's like if you don't know the question to ask, it's hard to get the answer. So understanding this is so important, so important to being able to evolve, being able to achieve that radical open-mindedness, and most importantly, being able to pursue and chase the truth, not just making yourself look right. Moving on. This is the last chapter we're going to be going over here from the life section today. This is going to be chapter 5. The biggest threat to making decisions. So now we've come down to everything, right? So we've come down to diagnosing problems. We've come down to searching for what is true. We've come down to diagnosing, like we said, the weak spot and analyzing situations, analyzing things that are thrown at us. And now it comes down to, okay, it's time for us to make decisions. How do we do that? Well, the biggest threat to making any decision is the emotions. So that's obviously you've heard of like okay, don't promise anything when you're happy, don't yell at anybody when you're angry, all that type of stuff. Allow yourself to get to that neutral point before you make any sort of decision. And now what's going to happen is, with that in mind, you think, okay, that's a pretty obvious thing, but how do I actually go about that? That's what chapter 5 talks a lot about. First of which is, don't get bogged down in the details. This is something that political conversations often have. And this is why political conversations between two opposing party members fall apart, I would say 95% of the time. Number one, because they don't understand the idea of subconscious and conscious mind takeovers. They don't understand the idea of seeking the truth, not just making themselves look right. So there's a lot of underlying problems there, root causes. Again, see, we're using terms. But ultimately, it comes down to here that they're getting bogged down in the details. Think about any time you've ever heard two political people arguing with each other. Most of the time, they're not asking questions. They're not looking to understand. It's just a laundry list of problems, of why I'm right, why you're wrong. It's just a laundry list of details that is ultimately ends up getting bogged down. And all you need to know in a conversation to make your decision, to be able to move forward with something, is the by and large. That's the level that you need. So, okay, let's look at it from like a business perspective here. Maybe you had a marketing routine, or like a marketing campaign that you completed. You can know that you've lost 20 cents per second on your Facebook ads, and that you gained $1.40 for every time that your Instagram campaign was shown, so on and so forth. You can know all that stuff, or you can know that by and large you made $20,000 and gained 600,000 followers off of your marketing campaign. That's the by and large. That's what I need to know. Are we positive? Are we negative? By how much? I don't need to know the little bit details. There's people who know that, and that's their job to know it. That's what that comes down to. Understanding the by and large to make your decisions, because when you start to understand and analyze all the little details, that's when making the decision becomes really, really hard, because as it said, you really do start to get bogged down in those details. And this is actually interesting. This really flies into the next point, which I was like, wow, this applies to all of us. Be an imperfectionist. Just focus on the big picture. It's really funny. My choir director in high school always talked about the big picture, get the big picture. He had a sign up in his room, get the big picture, so on and so forth. But yeah, really interesting. Get the big picture, be an imperfectionist. Talk about how well that applies to all of us startup entrepreneurs, all of us startup content creators, all of us startup people with a dream. We can wait till we have the best gear. We can wait till the moment's just right, which, by the way, it never is. We can wait until, okay, things are just the way I want them. I have everything I want. I feel like I'm ready, and then something goes wrong and doesn't happen, where ultimately all we could have done from the very beginning is just do it. Thank you, Nike. You had it right from the beginning. Just start. Just do it. I think that is so valuable and so important. And that's what it is talking about here, is literally just being a perfectionist. Get the big picture. Okay, I want to create a YouTube channel. Yeah, maybe I don't have the best microphone, but I got a mic and I got a camera. I'm just going to do it, because the big picture is I'm creating content. The big picture is I'm putting stuff out. Maybe the big picture is I want to start a Shopify store. All right, maybe I don't have all the best gear, or I don't have all the best software to figure stuff out, but I started, right? I have products up, and then we can adjust from there. Get the big picture. Don't get bogged down in all the little details, because that's the thing about getting bogged down in the details. It makes it so hard to actually ever truly get started. And also this talks about when you're having those conversations as well. We talked about conversations in the last chapter. There's two types of conversations, above the line and below the line. Above the line conversations are conversations that are focused on the big picture. It's focused on, okay, let's diagnose the root of our problem. Let's let's talk about how we did. Let's talk about where we're going to move on forward. Let's talk about, the big picture stuff, how we can improve as a whole. What are the needs of the group? Stuff like that. Whereas the below the line conversations, what I'm going to refer to as most political conversations, are the conversations that are going to get caught up in the weeds of, he said this, you did that, that, this, that, the other thing. We're ultimately okay, but that's not doing anything to improve anything. We're just pointing fingers at that point. So are you having a above the line conversation or a below the line conversation when you're trying to, pass on the decision that you made that was based upon understanding and getting the big picture? And to also then understand that multiple levels exist for all subjects. So all subjects have their weeds, all subjects have their above the line conversations and their below the line conversations. And there's going to be times where the below the line conversation is important. There's going to be times where you need to delve into the weeds. A big one of this is like if you're developing software, you better be delving into the code. You better be delving into this is working, this is not. You can't just put out a bare bones product. You need to delve into it a little bit. Maybe you're looking at the statistics for your company. You need to delve into those weeds. But you have to understand what kind of conversation you're going to have before you have that conversation. It allows you to prepare, allows you to get into that right mindset. Okay, moving on from that. Logic and evidence-based decision-making is best. This is where the literal person is going to really be able to help out groups of the conceptual people, because the literal people are going to be able to then look at it from the numbers perspective and understand, okay, this is the logic, this is the evidence, this is how we make a plan based on the evidence, not just the emotion, because the conceptual people, much like myself, tend to be a little bit more emotional than literal some of the time. And then finally, then the best choice has more pros than cons, not just no cons. And probability is better than possibility. So let's just talk about that first one quick. The best choice has more pros than cons, not no cons. That kind of comes down to like there's no perfect person, right? No one out there is great. No one out there is going to be the exact person that you want if you're looking at like a relationship standpoint. It's just understanding that people are people. People are going to have quirks. There's not like the one perfect person. Everybody has their ups and downs, and it's understanding that the best person is the person that works the best with you, not perfectly with you, because that just doesn't exist, right? And that kind of comes down to this, is that there isn't the perfect time, there isn't the perfect decision, there isn't the perfect piece of gear, there isn't, the perfect business, there isn't the perfect YouTube channel. But what's best is the best, marketing strategy, the best piece of gear, the best person, the best anything else in life that is going to allow you to get to the next level and has the least amount of cons with it, not just completely perfect, because it just doesn't exist. There's no unicorn, right? And then finally, probability is better than possibility. Again, this is a literal advantage because probability is quantifiable. Possibility is not. Probability is quantifiable. Possibility is not. And really all of this, everything that we talked about just comes down to being radically open-minded, as we discussed in the beginning of this entire review, being radically open-minded. Being radically open-minded and radically transparent is so, so important. And if you take one thing away from this book, that's what it is you need to take away. Again, Principles by Ray Dalio, probably one of the best reads I've had in a very, very long time. And his work principles section of the book is going to take everything that we just heard about and apply it to specific workplace problems and show ways that we can go about solving them and elevate our workplace environment as well as ourselves. I highly suggest that you get this book and go on and read it. Wherever links are located on the platform that you're watching, if links can be located there, this book will be listed there. I will say it is an affiliate link, so if you do go ahead and choose to buy and purchase the book, I do appreciate you supporting the channel and the show so we can keep doing more deep dives on books like this one. If there's a book that you think we need to review, if there's a book that you think is a pertinent and worthwhile review here on the All About How podcast, definitely go ahead and tell us about it. Leave us a comment, give us a DM, do whatever it is you got to do to get in touch with us, and we will be sure to check out that book for the show. Really appreciate you guys listening. If you listened all the way through, this is definitely our longest podcast to date. However, I think it was definitely worth it. After all, it is a deep dive, so I do think it was worth our while. I hope you found the value in it as I did. Hopefully this has also inspired you to go get the book and check it out for yourself because it was incredible. Really, really loved it. Again, Principles by Ray Dalio. Go ahead and pick that up. Guys, this has been the All About How podcast, and I was your host, John Knott from growingau.com. Real quick, fun fact, tip of the day. So Ernest Hemingway, the American author, really loved cats. Literally hundreds of cats. This man was cat crazy. And he had polydactyl cats, which means that they had an extra toe on their foot. So he had this estate in Key West that I've been to. It's gorgeous, with a whole bunch of these six-toed cats running around. It's really insane. But hey, it's kind of cool. Polydactyl cats are six-toed cats, and Ernest Hemingway had a lot of them. Guys, if you enjoyed the podcast today, go ahead and leave us a like. Really appreciate you listening. I'll see you tomorrow on day 10. Say goodbye to the single digits, and we'll catch you all tomorrow.